Hey there guys, welcome back for another Mortal Realms painting video. This week taking a look at painting Neave Blacktalon from issue 73 of the Mortal Realms magazine. Now I know that Neave Blacktalon is for the whatever they are called, the gold ones, gold guys, can never remember the name of them, but yeah, the guys in gold. She's one of theirs, but I don't want her as one of theirs, so what I'm doing is painting her up as a Celestial Vindicator, and as I don't play games it doesn't really matter. If I do, then it would just be something that I would either leave out or check with my opponent that I could use it, obviously in friendly games, use it as a model for my army and just keep all the rules except any special rules that she would give her, you know, her army. So yeah, if you want to paint along or see how I've done it, check out the rest of the video. So first of all, you can see here I've got her cloak left off and also her head. Those will be painted separate and added on in a later stage, and I've gone ahead and primed her in just a straight grey primer, and all I'm doing now is applying a few thin layers of Incubi Darkness to get a nice even coat, solid coat, all over the parts that I want to be obviously this turquoisey green that the Celestial Vindicators have as their armour colour. So I'll get on with this, catch you guys in a sec. Okay, so with the first layer down, I'm now using a 50-50 mix of Incubi Darkness and Sotek Green, and this has been thinned slightly to allow a little bit better blending or layering on the model here. So just using the leg for an example of where I'm applying the colours. This is the mid-tone, so I'm using it on anything where the light is going to hit the most, or even sort of a little bit. So anything that's would be under complete shadow, such as the inside, underside of her legs, I'll you know, leave the Incubi Darkness, and this will go everywhere else. This does cover the majority, I'd say 2/3 of the Incubi Darkness areas, and what I'm also doing is not going right up to layered edges, so where it a panel overlaps another one, I'll stop just before touching that next panel to leave a little bit of shadow in that sort of that step down area. This way I don't have to do any panel lining later on, as I'm already leaving it in whilst painting like this. If I happen to you know, go in there a little bit, I can always go back into the Incubi Darkness and panel line it, but obviously for the most part I want to try and not have to do that. Okay, so now that I've got the 50-50 mix in there, I'm now going in with just some pure Sotek Green and edge highlighting all of the shadowed areas, just a little bit of reflective light and detail in there, so it's not just straight Incubi Darkness. And then on the outside areas where the light's going to hit a little bit more, I'll do much more of a thicker edge highlight, again covering about half of the area that I'm painting. So on the feet, for example, here I'm covering, you can see a little bit of an edge highlight, and then I'll go back and cover a little bit over that, so it's a thicker highlight that I can then add a more defined edge highlight over the top in the next step. But for now I just want to get the edge highlights on everywhere. And then finally I'll use some Temple Guard blue and just go back over and add a finer highlight, edge highlight, to anywhere where the light is going to hit the most. In the case of the top of her thigh, I'll do a little bit more of a broken up highlight, just to add a little bit of texture in there, make it look like the armor's got, you know, a little bit of dentage and stuff like that. And then you can see here, just going along basically the top of everything, on the outside edges where the light would hit the most. Okay, so with all the Sotek green areas done, so the majority of the armour, I'm now using some Abaddon black and applying this to not only areas that I want to be black, but as always any areas that are going to be metallics. This gives a much better under or base tone for metallics. It makes them stand out much better than it does if you try painting them over a lighter colour. So I always try to get a black undercoat for my metallics. So obviously I'm going around pretty much all of the armour now. Anything that is left grey that you can see on the model is going to be done in black. So it's the trims on the leg and wrist guards, the under armour behind her knees and on the inside of her elbows, her weapons, and the sort of this rib piece that she has just under her chest, that I've left. You can see it a bit grey there, and then obviously leather straps and anything like that. Okay, so I'm now moving on to working on the inside of the cloak, so that I can reattach this to her, so that I can then paint the outside much easier. You can see that I've attached it to basically a stick of blue tack or sticky tack, whatever people want to call it, just to hold it on the outside so that I can get the inside painted. Now I've gone ahead and primed that with the Abaddon black at the same time that I did the black on the armour, and I'm now using some Mephiston red and wet blending this down to the black in the shadow areas. So you can see here I'm just going backwards and forwards. The black is still a little bit wet. It was the last thing that I did before switching to this, and what I'm now doing is basically blending it up, let it dry slightly, and then blend some more. It's a bit of a sort of a backwards and forward process to get this blend right, but yeah, the more red you add, obviously the more red it's going to be. This is thinned down slightly so that it's thin layers. I'm not, you know, globbing on thick layers of paint here, but just enough to make sure that it saturates over the black and blends with it where I want it to. Right, I'll then follow that up once that's dried with Evil Sun's Scarlet, and again this is quite thinned down, and you can see that I'm just dipping into some water there to thin it a little bit more and getting it to the areas that I want. As I pull the brush off screen down towards me, I'm drying the brush on a paper towel and going back in and removing some of that wet paint. And what this allows me to do is similar to wet blending. It's more the opposite. I'll apply the paint and then remove what I want to get a smoother transition, and then you can see here I'll then add a little bit more, go back to it as the darker area dries, and that allows me to get sort of a nice smooth transition from the black to the darker red, and then into this brighter red just on the highlights. As I say, the paint is quite wet. I haven't got any kind of retard or anything in there. It's just obviously taking a little bit of time to dry, which allows me to play about with it a little bit. If your paint dries a bit too quick, then you may have to add some acrylic retarder, which slows the drying time a little bit. But if you're in sort of, you know, a fairly cool room, then it shouldn't dry too quick, and you can achieve a fairly decent result using this method. Okay, so as you can see here, I've reattached the cloak to the model, and all I'm doing now is using the Mephiston red. I'm just painting in the tassel, the leather straps that she has down her front, and obviously the back of those that you can see between her legs. I'll then use the Evil Sun's Scarlet to just do a simple edge highlight on the raised edges of this, and that will give a nice simple red leather look. Okay, so obviously with the cloak attached, I can now get to working on the fur side of it, and for this I'm just applying some Mournfang brown all over the fur here, and obviously the idea is just to get a nice even coat over all of the fur, except for, as you can see there, I've got the little gem in the corner which I'll put some black on, and also there's a little piece of scroll that flows just over the top of it on her left shoulder, as you can see me going around here, which obviously I'll paint up later. I've gone ahead and already painted up the front half before I glued this on, but you can leave that and then paint it on during this step instead. It's entirely up to you, but obviously I'll get on with this, get a nice even coat down, and then we can move on to the next step. And the next step is nice and simple: a good coat or a good wash of Agrax Earthshade over all of the brown. Doesn't matter about pooling too much, you know, you want a little bit of this in between all that fur texture, so yeah, just blob it on, smooth it out. Obviously you don't want a huge blob of this sat somewhere, but you know, you can get a good generous helping over the top of this, and then obviously let it dry. If you're worried about sort of large patchy areas where the it tends to settle, then you can do this in 2 or 3 thinner coats and you'll get the you know, the same result. But I find that you know, just one fairly good wash over the top, and then leave it for about 15 minutes, 10 to 15 minutes to dry thoroughly, and then we can go in with a dry brush. So once the wash has had time to dry, I'm now just taking a small dry brush, this is one of the Army Painter ones, and going back into that Mournfang brown. You can see, just dabbing it on, and then I've got a little bit of textured water artist paper here, just to remove the excess, and then just dry brush over the top. Now what I tend to do is try to follow so that I'm coming across the pattern of the fur. So obviously the fur has been sculpted, so it's going down following that curve. I'll obviously come sideways onto that, so that we catch most of the edges and don't go in between each of those little bits of fur detailed. Now what I'll do is I'll do this a few times over, each time concentrating a little bit more on the raised area rather than trying to get it down into the recess or anything. You can then see that I'm mixing in just a small amount of I believe that is Ushapti bone. I cannot remember, guys, apologies for that, but yeah, any kind of bone or pallid witch flesh, anything like that, sort of a light colour, creamy colour. Very small amount because it will make this go pink otherwise, and then you can see here that I'm just very carefully brushing it along the surface just to pick up some extra highlights. Okay, so moving on to the metallics. First up is Retributer Armor, and this is obviously going to be used for all of the gold areas. So that's the pommel of the 2 axes, the crown piece behind her head that I have currently got in the same colour as her armour. I will actually go back and do this in gold instead. I decided that the gold would look better. The shoulder pauldron, she has obviously the lion one that is exposed, the other one is under the cloth, but she does have the little meteor emblem that's holding the ribbon on, so obviously you want to get that. And then any sort of basically gold trim, so anything around her gauntlets and her leg braces, and also the emblem on her belt. And then the collar area around her neck, and also the rib underlining. The crossbow that's folded up on her waist, I don't do too much with that. I pretty much leave it in the black that it's done in, and just get the gold on the areas that would be gold if it was unfolded. But obviously you can choose your own judgment for what areas of that you want to be gold. If you do want more detailing on there, then obviously I recommend painting it before attaching the cloak, but because the cloak does hide the majority of it, just black and a little bit of gold was enough for that. Okay, so with all the gold dry, I'm now shading it with some Reichland Flesh Shade, but I'm not giving it a full all over wash like I have in previous videos. I'm actually trying something, a new technique that I'm kind of happy with the results of. I'm using this almost like, or as a shade. I'm not putting it in areas that I want highlight, although I do use it for pin shading in those areas that are going to have a bit of light, but I am using it to layer up on an area to darken it. Now I've noticed with shading or with shade paints, they tend to sit in the middle of a line of detail. The only way I can really explain it is on the gold piece going up and down her leg here that I'm now doing. It will sit in the centre of that and won't actually touch the edges, which leaves a natural highlight. If you put too much on there, then yes, it does tend to go over the edges. But a small amount, you can actually get some control and just cover it in those sort of that centre area, and leave the Retributer Armor as a highlight without having then to go back in and do edge highlighting with Retributer Armor. It's definitely a time saver. Personally, I can't tell too much difference between giving a full over shade and then going back and edge highlighting everything and leaving it like this. Smaller areas such as I'm doing here, obviously it's a little bit more difficult to control, but definitely for these under areas, if you do it in thin layers, it dries fairly quick, a minute or so, which means you can go back over and add another layer and essentially just darken up an area. For the obviously the line on the top here, you can see that I'm flooding it in, and then what I'll do is go back in and pick some of it out, especially on the raised areas. I'm just trying not to get too much on there, although I will go back in and darken or brighten up certain areas once this is dried anyway. So obviously if you want to do it the traditional method of just flooding the area with a wash and then go back and edge highlight, that's fine, but for me for now I'm trying this new technique where I'm going back over and darkening up the area with a shade. You could probably do this with a darker gold paint as well, or work in reverse and do how you would normally would with layering and highlights. Obviously put down a dark colour and then work your way up to your brightest, but essentially I'm just doing the opposite of that with a shade. Okay, so for the axe heads themselves, I'm just using some iron breaker and obviously just giving that a couple of coats to get those down in a nice silver metallic, and that is pretty much the only silver area that I actually have on this model, is just the axe heads here, so nice and simple on that part. I'll then give them a quick wash of Nuln oil just to sort of darken them up a little bit, dirty them up, and then let that dry before coming back. Right, so next up I'm just taking a little bit of Fenrisian Grey and some Abaddon Black here. Obviously the Fenrisian Grey has a slight blue tint to it, which will give you a similar colour if you mix enough of it, will give you something similar to Eshin Grey. So you can save yourself a little bit of money just by buying Abaddon Black and Fenrisian. For me personally, I just couldn't be bothered to get the Eshin Grey out. I had the Fenrisian Grey here anyway, so I just grabbed that and figured I'll mix the two up. So what I'm doing is obviously making a grey black to highlight all of the black areas. So that's, as you can see here, the straps on the belt, the top area of her forearm on the inside is black leather, and then the area behind her knees slightly. Again, not too much to do with this, but yeah, so I'll do those, and then with the Fenrisian Grey I'll mix more of that in and get it a lot lighter, and then use that as a very fine edge highlight just on some of the leather straps that are more exposed to a light source. Okay, so moving back to the gold now, I'm just going back and picking off highlights where the Reikland Flesh Shade may have dulled down a little bit. For the most part this is just the sort of the front areas of the axe. Obviously I want that to be a bit brighter. The Lion Pauldron, because I did more of a flood wash on that, there's obviously some raised areas that I want a little bit brighter, and similar to down by the bottom of her feet, some of that obviously wash sort of settled down there a little bit more. So yeah, I'm just going around and sort of cleaning up with the gold really. Anywhere where it's most exposed to light, such as the pauldron here, I'm doing a lot more edge highlighting. Other areas where it's in a darker area, I'm not too worried about it if it's settled how I wanted it to. If not, then obviously I'll go in with a very fine edge highlight in those areas as well. And then finally, using some Stormhost Silver, I'll now go in and edge highlight the silver on the axes, the iron look there, and I'll also go in and pick some edge highlights on certain details where the light I think is going to pick the most, catch the most, reflect the most. So these are sort of the brighter reflections. Typically these will be on anything that is almost parallel with the top, and also corners or very sharp edges. You don't want to do too much with this. Do use it sparingly. If you go too much, then it's going to look like silver over the top, and we want it to be a little bit more of a highlight. Okay, so with the body all fully done now, I'm now painting the face, and you can see I've went ahead and left it on the sprue, just how they showed in the magazine. Just cut off this little bit of sprue, makes it much easier for painting and holding. Some people will clip it off and drill a hole in the bottom of the neck, and then using a paper clip pin it in there, but to be honest it's just the same as what we're doing here. So all I'm using here is some Kislev flesh, and just making sure I get a nice couple of even layers over all of the skin area. Okay, so for the hair, I wanted her to be more towards sort of a greying blonde, rather than the black that she has for Neave Blacktalon, because obviously she's not her. So what I'm using here is some Doombull Brown, and I've also got some Phalanx Yellow on the palette, and what I'll do is mix those a little bit together, just to get a little bit more towards that golden brown. And you can see here I'm sort of blending that into the brown on the underside, but keeping it more on the top side of her. Alright, so once that has dried, you can see here that I'm now mixing in a little bit more, but I'm mixing it in with the the Kislev flesh a little bit, and I'm just carefully or gently brushing this across the top, very much like a dry brush, and this is just to give a little bit more of a yellow blonde highlight to the top before I add a shade, which will obviously tone it all back. So this is leaving some of those recesses and just giving a little bit of a highlight along the top of it, until I have something that looks like this. You can see that she's got some shadow in there, and then just a little bit of the highlighting. Now you can see I'm mixing a little bit of that Fenrisian grey just to get that sort of grey tone. This will go a little bit green because of the yellow that's in there, but that's fine. You know, it works well as a tone for you know, sort of a dirty blonde anyway, having that slight green tint to it. And again, I'm just going very carefully over the top areas just to add some of those sort of grey-green hairs. Right, and with that done, just a nice wash of Reikland Flesh shade over everything. This will give a slightly red-brown tint to the hair, and it will sort of tone down that yellow a little bit and that green. And obviously in the face, this is going to you know, catch up in the eyes, the cheekbones and things like that. I'm not looking to get it to pull too much. You can see here that I'm using the tip of the brush to manipulate the wash a little bit and get it in areas that I want, just to yeah, make sure that it settles in those sort of shadow areas. Alright, so after about 10 minutes of letting that dry, I'm now going back with the Kislev flesh, slightly thinned down, and I'm just using this to highlight certain aspects of her face, such as the round of her ears, down her nose, her forehead, the top of her chin, and her lips. I'm using obviously a small brush here with a very fine point, and being very careful just to use that point in contact, just to yeah, get those highlight areas on there. And as I said, this is a little bit thinned down, not to the point where it's going to run. We don't want it running into recesses and such, but it is going to allow some of that darker tone to show through a little bit and give a little bit more of a smoother blend. I've also gone and done her eyes. I had to do that off camera. There's no way I can try and do that with the camera in front of me. At some point I will try and do a faces tutorial. If you guys would be interested in that, let me know down below, or hit like on the video, and I'll try and get some close-up work where I can show you how I go about detailing a face, as hard as that is. And yeah, that is pretty much it. The hair I'll go back over with the light green tint mix, and just very lightly dry brush on the top, again just to pull it out and give a little bit of highlight on there. But apart from that, that will be it. I will then clip the head off, attach it to the model, and we can take a look at the final thing. Right, and there she is, guys, one finished Neave Blacktalon. So I hope you guys have enjoyed the video. I hope you like the end result of the model. If you did, hit that like button. If you're not yet subscribed, hit that subscribe button. If you have recently subscribed, a big warm welcome to the inner circle to you. Thank you for your support. It means so much to me when you guys hit those subscribe buttons. But until next time, guys, that is all for today. Take it easy and keep painting those minis.